Dashfield. We will be answering your questions at the end of the webinar, and questions can be submitted in the questions panel on the right hand side. CPD certificates and a copy of the slides will be emailed to you after the session. And I'll now hand you over to John to begin the session.
Okay, so morning everyone. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today. And the title of this session, as you know, is The Art of Deep Client Engagement. And the way we're going to run it, originally it was going to be a kind of conversational webinar between me and Lee Travis, but unfortunately Lee, for reasons beyond his control, can't be with us today. So it's going to be myself. So the way we're going to run it is that I'm going to share some information for about 40 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So if you've got any questions, then you can jot them down or hold off, and then Amy's going to read those to me if you send them in via the messaging system on the webinar system, and then we can answer those a bit later on. So the art of deep client engagement, what's this all about? Well, it seems to me that it's really important that clients really value the work that an advisor or a practitioner can do for them. And the more deeply engaged that a client is, the more meaningful that the work is to the client that goes on between the advisor and the client, then there are multiple benefits to that. As you've probably seen in the material or the advertising that went out for the session, really these benefits of when someone is deeply engaged in the work you do together are things like they'll entrust you with more of their money, they'll see even more value in the work that you do together, they'll hold your advice and you in the highest regard, they willingly pay fees without quibble, they become totally loyal, and they refer you to other like-minded people. And all these are a byproduct of the client being really engaged in the work. So what we're going to do is look at the core elements of that. So first and foremost, what really matters, what really helps to deeply engage a client is a level of trust that is built between the practitioner and the client. And one of the mistakes, I think, that often goes on in the financial services business between an advisor and the client, and it's inadvertent, I would say, or an innocent mistake a lot of the time, but one of the things that the business has done, it is, the way I would talk about it, is it's separated life and money. So what I mean by that is, imagine that a practitioner can work with a client on one of three levels. So one of those levels can be what I would call a product and investment centered advisor. So product and investment centered means that basically what the practitioner does is talk to the client about products and investments. So they might talk to the client about their pension, or they might talk to the client about investing some money. And that seems to make sense, but I think what goes on a lot of the time is the conversation only stays on that level, or the relationship only stays on that level. So another level would be what I call a problem and solution centered approach or advisor. Problem and solution centered approach is this, that really what's gone on in the financial services business over the last few years is that, as you know, practitioners have been required to increase their levels of technical knowledge considerably. And so with a lot of very highly qualified practitioners out there these days, I think what's going on is that practitioners are talking to their clients about what they know about, which is how to solve financial problems. And again, it completely makes sense to do that. And yet there's still another level involved in building a high level of trust and a high level of client engagement. And that's what I would call being completely client-centered. Okay? And what I mean by completely client-centered is that at all times the focus of attention is on what really matters to the client and what really matters in their life, and then finding out that information and then connecting that to the advice that the client's getting around the money. So what I mean by when the financial services business separating life from money is only talking to the client about products or investments, or only talking with the client about financial problems, when in fact, see, money is a means value. So what that means is that money is just a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. So it's what the money can do for us, or do for someone, or what the money, or what we can do with the money, rather than just having the money itself or just focusing on the money. So what really matters to most people is their quality of life, both now and in the future. You see, and what happens if we separate life and money, it's not that that's not helpful, it's just that there's a whole nother level beyond that, where the relevance of advice and the relevance of recommendations and the relevance of the work that a practitioner does can go to a whole new level, which creates a completely different level of trust. And that's when, instead of separating life and money are fully connected. And what I'm going to talk about is, well, how do you do that? How do you collect life and money? How do you create a meaningful experience for the client and experience for yourself, all of the benefits of having that deeper level of trust and that much deeper level of engagement from the client? So what I'm going to say is that for the focus of the rest of what I'm going to be talking about, it's about the conversations that go on between the advisor and the client, because the area that has really significant upside potential for deepening the relationship, for deepening the quality of the work, is the conversations that take place between the advisor and the client. And as I said before, you know, those conversations can be about products or investments, those conversations could be about financial problems, or first and foremost, those conversations could be about what really matters to the client and finding out what really matters to them in their life, and then putting those two or putting that together with the advice. So the advice, the financial advice, feeds right into what really matters to the client. So what I'm going to talk about are the 5 core elements of what I call powerful client conversations. So there's 5 core elements that go into elevating the quality of the conversations that take place between the advisor and the client. And what I'm not saying is you know, do away with products and investments or do away with solving financial problems. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the more relevance that these things have to the client's life, in fact, the amount of product and investment, or the amount of problems and solutions that the advisor can solve or provide, will actually go up, because as someone's level of trust goes up, with then they're going to be inclined to do more business, and they're going to be inclined to be more loyal, and they're going to be inclined to give more referrals. So the first element of a powerful client conversation is really the absolute core factor that everything else sits upon. And that core factor is what I would call state of mind, or quality of mind. Now, in business, what we tend to focus on is what I call the visible. So we tend to focus on what we can see. That would be tactics and strategies and methods and behaviours. So to give an example, if you look up the top selling business books on Amazon, for example, what you'll find is the majority of those books are how-to books. They're telling you how to do something, so they're focusing on behaviour. Okay. Now the trouble with that, or the problem with that, is that behaviour is the result of state of mind. Behaviour is after the fact of state of mind. And the reason that we tend not to even consider state of mind as a factor is because it's invisible. You know, a friend of mine who is a state of mind practitioner or a state of mind psychologist, he calls it the in front of the eye and the behind the eye factors. So in front of the eye is what we can see, what I'm talking about, the visible, and the behind the eye is the invisible. And yet, as we all know, state of mind, you know, is a significant factor. I mean, if you look into the world of sport, for example, of course you've got to know how to play the particular game that you're playing. And yet we all know that someone's state of mind, a sports player's state of mind, for example, is an absolute critical factor in their performance. I mean, we've all seen it when a sports team or a player, individual player, you know, gets out onto the pitch or the field or is in the game, and they're in a terrible state of mind, and they don't perform. Their performance goes south, and yet they know how to play the game, and yet in a state of mind that isn't useful, all our abilities seem to leave us. And this is just as relevant in every single thing that we do in life as it is in professional sports. Is as relevant for all of us as it is in the professional world. And in the business world, we tend not to be very focused on quality of mind or state of mind because it's invisible. And yet, in terms of the quality of experience that we can create for our client, I mean, let's just compare what I would call healthy psychological functioning to unhealthy psychological functioning. So just imagine someone going into a meeting with a client with what I would call unhealthy psychological functioning. So let's imagine going into to meet with a client, and we're distracted by our own thinking, we feel tense, we feel anxious, we feel worried, we feel insecure, we feel disconnected, and because of that we don't listen very well, we tend to be very consumed with our own thinking. When we're in a low state of mind, we tend to take things personally, we tend to be very focused on ourselves, we are prone to lapses in judgment, and it's very hard to connect with another human being if we're very consumed with our own thinking. Okay, so if we compare that to healthy psychological functioning, imagine going into a meeting where you know, we've got clarity of mind, we feel relaxed, we feel at ease, we have a very low self-orientation, meaning that we're able to put our focus of attention completely on who we're with, we listen exceptionally well, we're trusting, we're resilient, we exercise good judgment, and we tend to very easily connect with someone when we're in a free and easy state of mind. We build good rapport. So what I'm saying is that our quality of mind is the biggest factor in the experience of the client in the meetings that we have with our clients. And see, in the business world, if you look up how to build trust, then nearly all of the material available is again in the world of the visible. So it's pointing us towards, well, what do you do to build trust? And they're saying things like, well, you need to listen to people, and you know, you need to you know, pay attention to people. And while this is true, What I'm saying is that if we're in a busy and distracted state of mind, all the advice in the world about how to behave is not going to be helpful, because the behaviour is a byproduct of state of mind. So when we're in a clear state of mind, we've got a free state of mind, we're not paying attention to a lot of our own thinking, then building trust is really easy, because instead of being trust as something we do, then trust, it really is just our natural way of being. It's kind of what we give out, and people will naturally trust us because we're just naturally focused in on them. And you know, this is such a big factor, the state of mind factor, that for the last 4 years of my practice in coaching and training and mentoring advisors, it's always the foundation that we use, state of mind. Because what I found is that if you try and just teach people behaviours, sometimes it works, but a lot of the time it doesn't, because the state of mind factor is such a big factor. Okay, so probably the best we're going to do on this call is for me to make state of mind visible to you as a factor. It's to have you consider it as a factor, because we're very limited on time. So the next element of the 5 core elements of powerful conversations is what I call intention. So intention is very closely related to state of mind. It's really a byproduct of state of mind, but I just want to share with you some research that I came across a few years ago, and it was by the computer company IBM. Now, what IBM did was, across a broad variety of industries, they did a survey of salespeople and how salespeople were perceived by their customers and by their clients. So it wasn't exclusive to financial services, this research, but it probably correlates reasonably well. So what IBM found was that 80% of salespeople are what they called product pushers. They found 15% of salespeople were what they called solution sellers, and only 5% of people are what they call trusted advisors. Okay, so the way that I interpreted that was that 80% of salespeople, their main intention or their main focus is to make a sale. Okay, and obviously if you're a salesperson or you're in business, it kind of makes sense. And yet, if we hold that intention of making a sale, if that's our primary objective, and we go in to meet with a new client or an existing client where, you know, we might be doing some new business, the client is really going to feel where we're coming from. Okay, they're going to feel that that's our intention, and it will actually create a trust issue, because while I'm not saying that someone wouldn't do business with us, but it kind of lowers the tone, it kind of lowers the potential of the relationship, and what it's going to do is create a very transactional relationship at best. So it will mean that it will be a relationship of product and supplier. Now, the reason people feel what other people feeling is because if you look into brain science, and this is certainly not new information, it's been around for a long time, but 30% of our neurons in our brain are what they call mirror neurons. And really what mirror neurons do is that they create the feeling in us of the other person or other people that we're with. So we tend to feel what people feel. Okay, we feel what others feel. Now, this is important because someone, a potential client or a client, is going to feel where we're coming from more than what we say or what we do. Our feeling state, our state of mind, our quality of mind is far more a significant factor than what we say or do. And we all know this. I mean, you know, we can have that experience of someone saying or doing all the right things, and yet certainly happened to me before, where you just get you get a feeling that you don't quite trust someone, or you get an uneasy feeling about them, or there's something about them but you can't quite put your finger on it. And this is why state of mind is so important. It's because what we're really feeling is someone's state of mind. See, and when we're in a clear, easy, relaxed, and yet focused state of mind, that's what a client's going to feel. And see, because of the mirror neurons, a client is going to relax to the degree that we're relaxed. And the reason that we want a client to relax and open up is because the higher the quality of information that we're able to elicit from a client in terms of what they really want from life, the more relevant the advice is going to be for the client when they receive it. So people are not going to be willing to open up if they feel that at some level, even though they might not be able to articulate it, if they feel at some level that we're only there to have to create a transaction, for example, it can create a kind of trust issue where someone's not going to open up, and therefore the relevance and quality of the advice, it can still be good, but it's not tapping into the real potential. So in this IBM research, they found that 15% of people were solution sellers, and this is what you might call consultative selling, where what the intention of the salesperson or practitioner is to engage in a conversation with the client to elicit a particular problem that a client has. So for example, it might be listening to a client and you might find that they've got an inheritance tax problem, for example. Now, see, for a problem and solution centered practitioner, they might be tempted to jump in as soon as they see the problem and want to solve the problem, which on one level makes sense, and yet it's leaving a load of potential untapped to go deeper. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't solve the inheritance tax problem or whatever problem you uncover, because of course you would, but it's being willing to go deeper, which is why in this research that IBM did, they found that only relatively small number, 5% of people, salespeople, are trusted advisors. And really what the distinction was in this research is that the customers and clients that perceive their salesperson or their practitioner as a trusted advisor, well, the difference is that it's a far more collaborative relationship. It's a far deeper relationship. It's where the client or the customer would be willing and to really place a very high level of trust on the input of the salesperson or the practitioner. See, and that's an absolutely key factor, because what that's going to do is lift the relationship out of being one where it's a transactional relationship or at the level of provider, the level of recipient and provider, and take it to that deeper level where, in a way, the client will want to run everything by their advisor first. It's the kind of relationship where the client would pick up the phone or contact the advisor and say, look, I need your input on this. Can you help me with this? And they really value what the advisor or client has got to say. And the only way that relationship can be created by that is if there's this very deep extra level of trust. And these core elements are absolutely key in that. So state of mind, intention, So it's really useful to just reflect on your own client relationships and consider to yourself, well, what is my intention when I go and meet a new client? Is my intention, to look for an opportunity to provide a product or an investment? Is it to look for an opportunity to solve a client's financial problem, or is it an opportunity for me to go and really connect with this person and really understand them at a deeper level, and to, in a way, collaborate with them on finding out what's important to them, so that first and foremost, when we both understand that, any advice and recommendations that I subsequently give are going to be that much more relevant and in tune with what the client really wants. Okay, so the next element in this is what I call setting the tone. Now, setting the tone is really down to the practitioner. It's the practitioner's job to set the tone of the relationship. It's not the client's job to set the tone of the relationship. So what I mean by this is, as you no doubt already know, clients are going to come to their advisor, or they're going to come to an advisor for the first time, and very often they're going to ask for a product or an investment. So people might come along and say, I want to put some money into a pension, or I need to get my pensions looked into, or I've got some money to invest. Or they might ask for a particular problem to be solved. They might have an inheritance tax problem, or they might have a particular financial problem. Now, the thing with it is this is like a conversational fork in the road, because my guess is that there's still a very significant number of practitioners who would happily jump in and provide the product or investment, or happily solve the client's financial problem. Okay, and that's fine if they want to do with that. What I'm saying, and what I've been saying, is that to do that is bypassing the opportunity to create this really deep client engagement and all the benefits that go with it. Okay, because this fork in the road is where, well, do you jump on the problem and solve it, or are you willing to have a deeper conversation about what really matters to the client? And see, when it really makes sense to you as the practitioner to have these deeper conversations, when they really make sense to you, then it's not going to be difficult to have them. See, it's quite easy to have them. Now, the reason state of mind is so important in this area is because there isn't really a prescriptive way of directing a conversation down this deeper route that's going to suit every single situation. And the reason is because, our state of mind is going to be different on a different day, and the client's state of mind is going to be different on a different day. And if you're meeting someone for the first time, there's no way that we can possibly account for the dynamic of a relationship or the dynamic of a conversation before we get into it. We can't mind read, we can't jump into the future. And if we go in with a prescriptive idea of how we want the conversation to go, now it may well be that works sometimes, but also there'll be plenty of times when going in like that actually lowers the tone of the relationship, because it's kind of, in a way, kind of like trying to control the situation. So the thing that we have on our side the most when we get into conversations with clients and potential clients is simply to be present. It's simply to not be consumed with our own intentions. It's to put all our attention on the client, because what happens is this: when we put all our attention on the client, so in essence we're in the room with the client rather than in here thinking about what to say or what to do. See, what happens is that if we get up in our heads thinking what to say or what to do, or thinking about the business we might get, or thinking about what the client's actually saying, which we'll come on to in a moment, all the time we're engaging in our own thinking, we're not actually present with the client. See? And what happens then is when we're not present with the client because we're up in our own heads thinking about things, we're losing that potential to really connect with someone in a human way. See, we're losing that potential to create a much deeper level of trust. So once you're in a conversation with a client, or just entering a conversation with a client, you know, setting the tone is really about, well, which way are you going to take the conversation? Are you going to take it down the route of talking about what you know about, first and foremost, or are you going to take it down the route where you're willing to take it to a deeper level? And you know, one of the things that I know from the work I do with advisors is sometimes, and you know, we feel insecure about taking it down a route where we don't really know where it's going. Okay, because talking about what we know is easy because it's what we know. Where talking about something that we don't know about, you know, asking a client a question like, well, tell me what's important to you, or tell me what you want to do with the rest of your life, or you know, what are your goals in life? Tell me about those. I'm really curious. Tell me about you. See, going down that kind of route, it's kind of going into the unknown. See, and that can sometimes give us an insecure feeling because we don't know. And yet, all the value is in the unknown. See, all of the juice, if you like, in the relationship is in this unknown area. Okay. Now, one of the ways that for the last few years that I've been setting the tone of conversations is this, and I find it really works. I'm not giving you this as a prescription. I'm just saying this is what I've done, and I've helped a lot of my advisor clients with this, and it really works. And that's, imagine you get an inquiry from a potential client, and you arrange to meet and have a conversation. Well, what I've been doing for the last few years, that I send people a couple of questions that I wanted to consider before we meet. Now, I've got a couple of examples of those questions that I use. So let's say you've agreed to meet with the client, and so you send the client an email a few days before you meet, and you say, look, I'm just emailing you to confirm our meeting at so-and-so time in so-and-so place. Before we meet, there's a couple of questions I'd like you to consider. Those are, what would you most like to get from the meeting? And how will you know if this meeting has been a brilliant use of your time? What would you see, hear and feel that lets you know this? And a second question might be something like, what are your most important outcomes and goals in life that require planning? Or another one will be, what areas of concern do you have with your finances, both short-term and long-term? You see, these kind of questions are just totally in the world of your client, and they help to focus people's attention. And I have never ever had a negative reaction in my practice, my coaching practice, to sending these kind of questions. And actually what really happens is people say things like, oh, when you sent me those questions, I knew it was going to be more than a chat. I knew it was going to be important. And very often, I'd say probably, I don't know, let's say 75% of the time as a guest, people send me lengthy answers before we meet, because what I say in the email is you can either send me your answers before we meet, or you can have them ready for when we do meet. And a lot of the time, people really put a lot of thought into this. And it's a beautiful way of focusing someone's attention before you meet, so that when you go into the meeting, you know exactly what you're going to be talking about. And you get straight into the point. And it builds trust because it's totally about the client. It's totally about the client. If you say, tell me what will make this meeting a brilliant use of your time. See, that kind of question is in the world of your client. And when you get the answer from the client, then you can focus your conversation around that, and therefore it's going to feed right into you know, what is important to the client, and it creates tremendous trust and rapport and credibility for you as the practitioner. Okay, so state of mind, intention, setting the tone, those are 3 of the 5 core elements. So the 4th one is listening. See, and of all the let's call it a skill in business, listening is probably, good listening is the least practiced thing in business. The fallout and the lost opportunities that come about through people failing to listen to one another is probably more than anything else in business. So imagine there were 3 levels of listening, okay? 3 levels of the way that someone can listen to another person. Level 1 is where, imagine you're the talker and someone's listening to you, and they're listening to you at level 1. Well, when they're listening to you at level 1, what they're really listening to is their own inner dialogue rather than what you're saying. So, and this is quite visible. So they might be foot tapping at worst or finger tapping the desk, and very, very clearly what they're listening for is to get their point across. So so they're not really listening at all. So they jump in perhaps on the conversation, or they finish sentences. So effectively, level 1 listening is not really listening at all. And yet, in the business world, I see this all the time. You know, we do listen to people at level 1, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it. So level 2 listening is probably the most common form of listening in business, and level 2 listening is what I call content listening. So level 2 listening is when we're listening to the words that someone's saying. So, for example, if someone's telling you about their financial situation, what we're doing is listening through the filter of our professional knowledge so that we can help or solve or fix or give advice on what we're hearing. Okay? So that's kind of level 2 listening. It's listening to the content. See, and the thing is, it makes sense to listen at level 2, because if all of our professional training has been to solve, to fix, or to give advice in some kind of way, then surely it's going to make sense to listen for that kind of stuff so that we can help the client. See, and yet there's a whole another level of listening beyond levels 1 and 2 that go into creating deep client engagement. Level 3 listening is really listening with nothing on our minds. So when we go in and we listen to someone and we're listening at level 3, we have an empty, quiet mind. See? Now, why is this important? The reason it's important is that levels, well, obviously level 1's not even listening at all, but level 2 listening is really listening on an intellectual level. See, and when we listen on an intellectual level, we are never going to create a deep sense of connection to another human being, because it's listening on the surface too much. And what happens is that when our own mind is busy evaluating what we're hearing, see, we're not actually even with the client because we're in our own head. See, and when we listen at level 3, the reason this is so important is because this is when we really go behind the words that someone's saying, and we start to get a feel for where somebody is coming from. And you see, what happens is when we listen at level 3 is that we tap into our own intuition in a much, much deeper way. And what happens then is that we're going to get insights, and we're going to get thoughts that really tap into what the client's trying to say. So on one level, the client might be talking about their financial problem, but when we listen at level 3, we might get a sense that, I don't know, someone feels really disturbed in a way by what they're telling us. You know, they're really frightened about the future. And if we bypass that and just jump in to solve the problems, see, we're not creating that level of empathy, we're not creating that level of human connection, because when we speak, our responses are going to be misaligned with what the client is really trying to communicate. And yet, when we listen with a quiet mind and we get a sense of what someone's trying to really communicate, we can speak to that. And when we speak to that, what people feel is that they've been really heard and they've been really listened to. See, and one of the, I think the potential mistakes in professional relationships is, you know, someone can come along and ask for a pension, or they could ask for money to be invested, or they could ask for a financial problem to be solved. That could be fulfilled in a compliant way, in a perfect kind of way, and yet the real issue has been missed. The real issue that the client's got has been bypassed because they've not been listened to at this deeper kind of level. Okay, so state of mind, intention, setting the tone, and deep level 3 listening are 4 of the 5 elements. And the final element is what I'd call client-centered questioning. And again, it's really about asking questions of the client that tap in first and foremost to the bigger picture before going and attending to the detail. So very briefly, there's 4 areas of client-centered questioning rather than specific individual questions. So the 4 areas, imagine you had a piece of paper and you drew a line horizontally down the middle and you drew a line vertically down the middle rather than horizontally across the middle. So you've got 4 quadrants. Okay, so in quadrant 1, imagine you've got what I call situation questions. Okay, so situation questions are not just the factual, hard fact information that you would put on a fact find. They are questions that elicit for the client and for you as the practitioner what the client's situation is in a softer sense as well. So, you know, is that person's financial situation declining, or is it improving? You know, what is their attitude to money? What kind of relationship do they have with money? You know, who is this person? It's much more than just filling out a fact find. It's does the client and do you as a practitioner really understand their situation with money? So the next quadrant would be what I call outcome questions. So outcome questions are really, what are the goals, objectives and outcomes that the client has that are going to need planning to accomplish? Okay, so what's important to the client? So again, there's different levels here. See, I think there's a lot of practitioners that would see the outcome as the client taking out a pension, and yet the question there for me would be, all right, a client takes out a pension, but why? You know, for what purpose? What's the money for? You see, there's this whole opportunity to talk to people about not the vehicle, but the destination, you see. And again, the state of mind, the willingness of the practitioner to listen is really going to determine the quality of the information that the client elicits, you see, because the client has to feel safe, secure, and that they won't be judged in order to really open up. So the third category is what I call meaning questions. Okay, now meaning questions really, are the outcomes, goals and objectives that you elicit from the client meaningful? You know, do they mean something in their life? So for example, if someone says, well, let's use that example of a few seconds ago. You know, if someone says, I want to take out a pension, well, instead of just saying, okay, I can help you with that, how much do you want to put in? You know, it's saying, well, let's put that to the side for a moment. What do you want to take out a pension for? What's the money for? Tell me about, you know, how you want to live your life in your retirement years. What do you want to do? You know, what are some of the things you've thought of? What are some of the things you've yet to think of? Who do you want to spend your time with? You see, the more you can get a client to engage in what the money's for and what the meaning of it is, see, the more engaged they're going to be in the whole advice process, the more meaningful it's going to become for them. And finally, the last category is what I would call obstacle questions. Now, what I mean by that is that obviously the financial services business places a lot of importance on life's unforeseen circumstances, like premature death or, critical illness or, losing a job. But there's also, well, what does a client see as their obstacles to what they really want in life? You see, there's a very fertile area to explore there. So it's simply asking a question like, once the client's shared their, goals and objectives, a question like, well, okay, what do you see as the risks? What could stop you? What do you see as the obstacles? See, and the reason this is important is because there could be things in the client's life that they see as an obstacle that you're never going to guess in a million years. It could be family circumstances, for example. It could be, it could be a million and one different things. And by getting this information out in the open, again, it's taking that level of listening and that level of understanding to a new level. And there may well be things in what the client says that you can factor into the advice, and therefore it takes the advice to a much deeper level and much more relevance, and that's what's creating the deep engagement. Okay, so I'm kind of aware that I've been talking for a fair while now, and I've taken us through these 5 core elements of a powerful client conversation. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Amy and just see if people have got questions. We've put the next 10 or 15 minutes aside to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you, John, for another insightful session. Just to reiterate, we'll be emailing the CPD certificates and a copy of the slides to you via email this afternoon. But we've not received any questions as of yet. If we give them a few more minutes and see if anyone submits anything.
Okay, maybe it's because it's a Monday morning, because when we did the session last week, we had quite a few questions, but maybe people are still getting over the weekend. But I'd love to know, what resonated with people about what I'm saying, or does it not make sense at all to people? I'm willing to answer any questions that people have got on this. And has anyone had any insights about it, or got any feedback?
We've had a question from Scott. How do you note down client responses while keeping at level 3 listening?
Great, that's a really good question. Yeah, because how do you note down what someone's saying or what a client's response is when you're listening at level 3 with nothing on your mind? Okay, now, see, here's the thing. I would suggest that when we're really listening to someone at level 3, it's amazing how much information that we would be able to recall from a conversation with somebody, because our listening has been so free, if you like, from our own thinking. So rather than a prescriptive, this is what you should do, this is kind of my take on it, and you'd have to kind of experiment for yourself. But I tend not to write things down very much at all, and if I did, it would be just the odd word here and there, and I tend to not write anything down when I'm listening to someone at level 3, because what I really want to do is really understand that person and connect with them, And by writing stuff down and taking my attention away from the client and onto what I'm writing down, I'm going to be oscillating between, you know, my attention being 100% on the client and my attention being on what I should write down. So when we're listening at level 3, a couple of things that we can do is that afterwards, what we can do is summarize with the client what the key factors are or the key points are, and then write them down. So it's kind of like after we've engaged in that level 3 listening, we can say to the client, okay, here's what I heard, and I'd just like to jot these things down and confirm back with you that I've got the main points of what we talked about. Okay, so in that way we're confirming in with the client what we thought we heard them say, and we're also giving the client the opportunity to confirm what we thought we heard them say. And equally, before we engage with the client in this kind of listening, you know, if you want to, you can frame it up and say, look, my preference is to not take notes, you know, while we're engaged in this initial conversation, because it's a distraction. So what I want to do is listen to you, and then at the end, write down, you know, the main points of our conversation. Is that okay with you? So what we're doing in a way is we're asking permission for that to take place, and sometimes I do that. And again, asking permission from a client is really, really important, because again, and it's a good point to make actually, that before we enter into client-centered questioning, it's really important to frame up or to gain the client's permission to go to a deeper level of questioning. So once someone's given you permission, then the ground is very fertile for asking, and it's much better to do that than to just dive straight in and to start asking, but without gaining prior permission first. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. A question from Matthew. The role of the financial planner has changed a lot. Do you agree that we almost have to completely retrain our fact-finding skills from the old-style sales model, which kept us in the 80%?
I think it's a really good question, and I mean, my personal feeling on that is that, you know, there's always been practitioners who work at this deeper level all the way through, and yet, as we know, the way I see the business, and for those of you who don't know, I mean, I had my own practice from 1991 until 2005, 14 years, and you know, very early on, as I joined the business as a tied agent, you know, it's a sales role. You know, it is a sales role. That's how the whole business was, and I think that, you know, there's still a big chunk of the business that's still in this transactional sales model kind of thinking. Now, because of the rise in technical requirements, you know, there's a whole ton of advisors these days who are really, really technically competent, and their focus of attention is on solving financial problems. Now, that's all well and good, okay? I'm not saying it, you know, each practitioner's got to make their own mind up and get behind what they're actually doing. What I'm saying is that, in a way, the transactional style of doing business is being squeezed harder and harder and harder for it to be a profitable activity. I mean, you know, how much evidence do we need? I mean, providers pay less money, okay? Providers have offloaded a load of costs from themselves onto practitioners, see? And we're seeing the rise of what they call robo-advisors. Now, they're not going to take the place of all advisors, there's no way, and yet what you can see is going on here is that what providers want to do is distribute their products as efficiently and effectively as possible. I mean, of course, it makes sense, you know, that of course they want to do that, and it's not a personal thing on the advisors, but the advisors, in my mind, have got to wake up. If and see where the real value is. See, and what I'm saying is that the value is not in the transaction anymore. See, and all the time that practitioners see the value in the transaction, they're going to get squeezed harder and harder and harder. The value is in the conversation, see, and really the big thing in my mind, okay, and I'm not asking people to agree with me, people are welcome to disagree with me, okay, it's only my thinking, but my thinking is that the value is in putting life and money together like that, so that first and foremost what the client experiences is their advisor is helping them to create a better quality of life and to accomplish their goals that are important to them in a financial sense. So essentially what they're doing is they're putting life and money together, and by doing that, you see, it's not, I'm not saying don't provide products and investments, and I'm not saying don't solve financial problems, because they're very much part of what a client-centered advisor would do. What I'm saying is there's a whole nother layer of potential for fees and for value to be created by having a deeper conversation. And if it's kept on the level of transaction, even though people might buy products and investments from an advisor, the level of trust is less. And when it's a transactional relationship, it's far easier for someone to go somewhere else. See, and what would happen is that when someone keeps their relationship on the level of just products or an investment, see, a client-centered advisor who can have a deeper conversation is going to come along and have a deeper conversation with the client, and the client will leave the transactional advisor because they see much more value in the deeper relationship, you see. And you know, I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the best practitioners in the UK that really are operating on this higher level, and their businesses are better businesses. They're more profitable. They get more referrals. It's a lot more fulfilling. So I suppose that's quite a long answer to yes. In my opinion, advisors would serve themselves and their clients by being willing to go to this a much deeper level.
Thank you. We haven't had any more questions for now. What I'll do is when we send the CPD certificates out later, I'll include John's email address in case if you think of any other questions that you'd like to ask him. So for now, we haven't any more questions, so I think we'll end the session. Thank you again, John.
That's my pleasure. Thanks everyone for attending.